Marcus Thompson had always been the class clown. At 23, he still carried that same energy wherever he went. His friends knew him as the guy who could make anyone laugh, even in the most serious situations. Some people found it charming, others found it annoying. Marcus didn't really care which category people fell into. When his college roommate Jake invited him on a trip to London, Marcus jumped at the chance. He had never been to England before, and the idea of exploring a new country excited him. Jake had been saving up for months to visit his girlfriend Sarah, who was studying abroad at University College London. Marcus tagged along, splitting the cost of accommodation and promising to give the couple some space when needed. Their first few days in London were everything Marcus had hoped for. They visited the typical tourist spots, took countless selfies, and Marcus made sure to crack jokes at every opportunity. At the Tower Bridge, he pretended to be a medieval knight. At Big Ben, he did his best British accent, much to the amusement of other tourists and the mild embarrassment of Jake. "You're going to get us in trouble," Jake warned him as they walked through Covent Garden on their fourth day. Marcus had just finished doing an impromptu comedy routine for a small crowd that had gathered around a street performer. "Come on, man. We're on vacation. Live a little," Marcus replied, still riding the high from the laughs he had just earned. "Besides, British people love a good sense of humor. They invented Monty Python." Sarah, who had met up with them that morning, shook her head with a smile. "Marcus, there's a difference between being funny and being disrespectful. Just be careful where you choose to perform your comedy shows." Marcus waved off their concerns. In his mind, he was just being himself. He had never encountered a situation where his humor wasn't welcome, and he couldn't imagine that changing now. The next morning, Sarah suggested they visit Buckingham Palace. "You have to see the changing of the guard ceremony," she insisted. "It's one of those quintessentially British experiences. Plus, the Queen's Guard are incredible to watch. They're so disciplined and precise." Marcus perked up at this. He had seen pictures of the famous guards in their tall black hats and red uniforms, standing perfectly still like statues. The idea of seeing them in person intrigued him, though probably not for the same reasons Sarah had in mind. "Are they really as serious as everyone says?" Marcus asked as they made their way toward the palace on the London Underground. "Absolutely," Sarah replied. "They're real soldiers, you know. They're not just there for show. They've served in combat zones and everything. The ceremonial duties are just one part of their job. But they just stand there, right? How hard can that be?" Marcus said with a grin. Jake shot him a warning look, but Marcus missed it entirely. When they arrived at Buckingham Palace, Marcus was impressed despite himself. The building was massive and imposing, with its gray stone facade and ornate gates. Crowds of tourists were already gathering behind the barriers, cameras ready to capture the famous ceremony. The three friends found a good spot near the palace gates, close enough to see the guards clearly. Marcus immediately noticed how still and focused the guards were. They stood at attention in their bright red tunics and bearskin caps, rifles held precisely at their sides. Their faces were completely expressionless, eyes staring straight ahead. "They look like toy soldiers," Marcus whispered to Jake, who hushed him immediately. As they waited for the ceremony to begin, Marcus watched the guards with growing fascination. He had never seen anyone maintain such perfect posture for so long. They didn't blink excessively, didn't shift their weight, didn't even seem to breathe heavily. It was almost inhuman. "I bet I could make one of them smile," Marcus said quietly to his friends. "Marcus, no," Sarah said firmly. "Don't even think about it. These guys are professionals. They take their job very seriously." "I'm not going to do anything crazy," Marcus protested. "Maybe just a little wave or something. What's the worst that could happen?" Jake grabbed his arm. "The worst that could happen is you get arrested for interfering with a military ceremony. These aren't actors, Marcus. They're real soldiers." But Marcus was already fixated on the idea. He had always prided himself on being able to make anyone laugh. It had become a personal challenge for him. The more serious someone was, the more determined he became to crack their composure. These guards, with their stone-faced expressions and rigid discipline, represented the ultimate challenge. As the ceremony began, Marcus watched with genuine interest. The precision of the guards' movements was remarkable. Every step was calculated, every turn executed with perfect timing. The music from the military band filled the air, and tourists pressed forward to get better photos and videos. Marcus found himself studying one guard in particular. The young man couldn't have been much older than Marcus himself, but he carried himself with a dignity and seriousness that Marcus had rarely seen in people his own age. The guard's rifle was held at exactly the right angle, his back straight as a board, his gaze fixed on some distant point that only he could see. "Challenge accepted," Marcus muttered under his breath. The ceremony proceeded without incident for the first 20 minutes. Marcus behaved himself, content to watch and learn about this famous British tradition. But as the initial novelty wore off, his natural instincts began to take over. He started small, making faces at the guards when their patrol routes brought them close to the barriers. When that failed to get any reaction, he escalated. "Marcus, stop!" Sarah hissed, but he was already committed to his mission. He began making exaggerated movements, trying to catch the peripheral vision of the guards. He waved enthusiastically, gave thumbs up, and even tried a few of his best celebrity impressions. The other tourists around them started to notice, some laughing at his antics, others looking uncomfortable. The guards continued their duties as if Marcus didn't exist. Their training had prepared them for exactly this type of disruption. Tourists trying to get reactions from the Queen's Guard was nothing new, and they had learned to tune out such distractions completely. But Marcus interpreted their lack of response as a personal challenge rather than professional discipline. In his mind, he just hadn't found the right approach yet. He was convinced that everyone had a breaking point, a moment where their serious facade would crack and reveal the regular person underneath. As the ceremony continued, Marcus grew more determined and less cautious. The lack of reaction from the guards was starting to frustrate him. He was used to immediate feedback for his humor, and the complete absence of any response was unsettling. "Maybe they can't see me clearly," he said to Jake. "I need to get their attention properly." "Marcus, please just enjoy the ceremony like everyone else," Jake pleaded. "You're starting to make a scene." But Marcus was already formulating his next move. He had noticed that one of the guards would be passing very close to their section of the barrier during his next patrol. This would be Marcus's best opportunity to make direct contact and finally get the reaction he was looking for. As the guard approached, Marcus leaned forward against the barrier. The young soldier's face was a mask of concentration and professionalism. His movements were crisp and precise, each step landing exactly where it should. Marcus watched him approach with growing excitement. "Here we go," Marcus whispered to himself, preparing for what he was sure would be his moment of triumph. The guard was now just a few feet away, close enough that Marcus could see the details of his uniform and the determination in his eyes. This was it. This was Marcus's chance to prove that even the most serious person could be made to laugh. What Marcus didn't realize was that he was about to learn a lesson that would change his entire perspective on respect, discipline, and the consequences of treating serious situations like personal entertainment venues. As the Queen's Guard approached Marcus's position along the barrier, time seemed to slow down. Marcus felt his heart racing with anticipation. This was his moment to prove that his charm and humor could break through even the most rigid military discipline. When the guard was directly in front of him, no more than 3 feet away, Marcus made his move. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small rubber chicken he had bought as a gag gift from a tourist shop the day before. Without thinking about the consequences, he squeezed it, producing a loud, ridiculous squeak. "Hey there, soldier boy," Marcus called out in an exaggerated Cockney accent. "Want to play with my chicken?" The guard's training kicked in immediately. His eyes remained fixed straight ahead, not even flickering toward the source of the disturbance. His pace didn't change by even a fraction of a second. It was as if Marcus didn't exist at all. This complete dismissal only fueled Marcus's determination. He squeezed the rubber chicken again, this time adding what he thought was a hilarious chicken dance. Several tourists around him started laughing and taking videos, which only encouraged him further. "Come on, mate!" Marcus shouted, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "I know you want to laugh! Just a little smile!" Jake tried to pull Marcus back from the barrier. "Dude, you need to stop this right now. People are staring." "Good," Marcus replied, shrugging off his friend's hand. "That means it's working." Sarah looked mortified. "Marcus, you're embarrassing yourself and us. Please just put that thing away." But Marcus was too deep into his performance to listen to reason. The guard had completed his pass and was now walking away, still maintaining perfect military bearing despite the disruption. Marcus saw this as a temporary setback rather than a clear message to stop. "Fine," Marcus muttered. "If subtle doesn't work, maybe I need to be more direct." The next guard to approach was older, probably in his late 20s, with the bearing of someone who had seen real military service. His uniform was immaculate, his posture perfect, and his expression revealed nothing but professional focus. This time, Marcus decided to up the ante. As the guard approached, Marcus began doing his impression of a chicken, complete with flapping arms and loud clucking sounds. The crowd around him was now openly watching the spectacle, some laughing nervously, others looking distinctly uncomfortable. "Bok, bok, bok," Marcus called out. "Hey, soldier, why did the chicken cross the road? To make you smile." The guard's response was the same as his colleagues. Absolutely none. He continued his patrol as if Marcus was invisible, his movements precise and disciplined. But Marcus noticed something else. Other guards had begun to take notice. They remained at their posts, but Marcus could sense a subtle shift in the atmosphere. "Marcus," Sarah said urgently, "I think you should stop. The other guards are starting to pay attention. And not in a good way." "Perfect," Marcus replied, completely misreading the situation. "If I can get them all to crack at once, it'll be legendary." What Marcus didn't understand was that the guards weren't paying attention because they found him amusing. They were noting a potential security threat that was escalating beyond normal tourist behavior. Their training had taught them to identify situations that might require intervention, and Marcus was rapidly approaching that threshold. Emboldened by what he saw as growing success, Marcus prepared for his grand finale. He had noticed that during the ceremony there was a moment when one guard would be standing completely alone at a specific post, temporarily separated from his colleagues. This would be Marcus's best opportunity for a one-on-one interaction. When the moment came, Marcus made his decision. Despite the increasingly urgent protests from Jake and Sarah, he ducked under the barrier rope that separated tourists from the ceremonial area. "Marcus, no!" Sarah shouted, but it was too late. Marcus had crossed into the restricted area, rubber chicken in hand, grinning broadly as he approached the solitary guard. The young soldier, probably around 21 years old, stood at perfect attention at his assigned post. His rifle was held precisely, his gaze fixed straight ahead. "Hey there, my friend," Marcus called out as he approached, waving the rubber chicken in the air. "I've got a joke that'll knock your socks off." The guard's training had prepared him for many scenarios, but rarely did tourists actually breach the security perimeter during a ceremony. Still, he maintained his composure, not moving from his position or acknowledging Marcus's presence. Marcus, interpreting this as the ultimate challenge, stepped directly in front of the guard, now just 2 feet away from him. The young soldier could clearly see Marcus in his peripheral vision, could probably smell his cologne and hear his breathing, but he remained motionless. "Come on," Marcus said, his voice taking on a more demanding tone. "I know you can hear me. Just one little laugh. What have you got to lose?" The guard's silence only frustrated Marcus more. He had never encountered someone so completely unresponsive to his attempts at humor. In his mind, this wasn't just about getting a laugh anymore. It had become a battle of wills, and Marcus was determined not to lose. "Fine," Marcus said, his cheerful demeanor beginning to crack. "You want to play statue? Let's see how good you really are." What happened next would be burned into Marcus's memory forever. He reached out with his free hand and gently poked the guard's arm just above the elbow. It was meant to be playful, harmless, just enough contact to prove that the guard was human and not actually a statue. The reaction was immediate and shocking. The guard's head snapped toward Marcus with military precision. His eyes, which had been staring into the distance moments before, now fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made his blood run cold. The young soldier's face, which had been carefully neutral, now showed the controlled anger of a professional warrior whose boundaries had been crossed. "Step back," the guard commanded in a voice that carried absolute authority. "Do not touch the Queen's guard." The words echoed across the courtyard like gunshots. Every conversation stopped. Every camera turned toward them. The entire crowd of tourists fell silent, suddenly aware that they were witnessing something serious unfold. Marcus felt his confidence evaporate instantly. The guard's voice carried a power and authority that Marcus had never encountered before. This wasn't just someone playing dress-up. This was a trained soldier who took his duties seriously, and Marcus had just crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed. I was just..." Marcus stammered, but the guard cut him off. "Step back now," the guard repeated, his voice even louder and more commanding than before. But the situation was far from over. Marcus's breach of protocol had triggered a response from the entire guard unit. Other soldiers were already moving into position, their training kicking in as they responded to what they now classified as a security incident. Within seconds, Marcus found himself surrounded by 3 Queen's guards, all of whom had abandoned their ceremonial positions to deal with the situation he had created. Their movements were swift and coordinated, the result of countless hours of training for exactly these types of scenarios. Marcus looked around at the circle of red uniforms and stern faces, finally beginning to understand the gravity of what he had done. These weren't entertainers or actors. They were real soldiers who had been trained to protect one of the most important buildings in Britain, and he had just interfered with their duties in front of hundreds of witnesses. The rubber chicken, which had seemed so hilarious just moments before, now felt ridiculous and inappropriate in his trembling hand. The crowd of tourists, who had been laughing at his antics earlier, now stared at him with a mixture of shock and disapproval. Marcus realized that his attempt to prove his comedic prowess had backfired spectacularly. Instead of earning laughs and admiration, he had managed to disrupt a centuries-old ceremony and potentially created an international incident. And this was only the beginning of the lesson he was about to learn about respect, consequences, and the difference between appropriate humor and dangerous disrespect. The lead guard, a sergeant with 15 years of service etched into the lines of his weathered face, stepped forward. His eyes held the kind of authority that comes from commanding respect in some of the world's most dangerous places. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Sir, you have interfered with a military ceremony and entered a restricted area without authorization. You will come with us immediately." Marcus felt his legs go weak. The reality of his situation was finally sinking in. This wasn't a game anymore. These weren't actors who would break character and laugh at his jokes. These were professional soldiers who took their duties seriously, and he had crossed a line that carried real consequences. "Look, I'm sorry," Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly. I was just trying to be funny. I didn't mean any harm. The sergeant's expression didn't change. Your intentions are irrelevant, sir. Your actions have disrupted a formal military ceremony and potentially created a security risk. You will need to explain yourself to the proper authorities. As the guards began to escort Marcus away from the ceremonial area, he caught sight of Jake and Sarah in the crowd. Jake's face showed a mixture of anger and embarrassment, while Sarah looked genuinely frightened. Other tourists were pulling out their phones, recording everything. Marcus realized that his moment of comedy was about to become a viral video for all the wrong reasons. Please, Marcus said to the sergeant as they walked. I'm just a tourist. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to touch anyone. Can't we just forget this happened? The sergeant finally looked directly at Marcus. And the young American was struck by the intelligence and experience he saw in the older man's eyes. Sir, we are the Queen's Guard. We protect the royal family and their residences. When someone breaches our security perimeter and makes physical contact with one of our soldiers, we cannot simply forget it happened. They led Marcus to a small building adjacent to the palace grounds. Inside, the atmosphere was all business. Marcus was asked to sit in a chair while the sergeant began filling out paperwork. Another officer, this one in plain clothes, entered the room and introduced himself as Inspector Williams from the Metropolitan Police. Mr. Thompson, Inspector Williams said, reading from a form that someone had apparently prepared with remarkable efficiency. You're an American citizen here on a tourist visa. Is that correct? Marcus nodded, his mouth suddenly dry. Yes, sir. I'm here with friends. We're just visiting for a week. And what exactly were you trying to accomplish during the changing of the guard ceremony? Marcus struggled to find words that would make his actions seem reasonable. I was just trying to have some fun. I thought maybe I could make one of the guards smile. I do comedy back home, and I guess I got carried away. Inspector Williams made notes on his pad. Mr. Thompson, do you understand that the Queen's Guard are active-duty military personnel who have served in combat zones including Afghanistan and Iraq? No, sir. I mean, I knew they were real soldiers, but I thought the ceremony was just for show. The ceremony is a formal military tradition that dates back centuries, the sergeant interjected, his voice carrying a hint of the pride he felt for his service. Every man standing guard today has earned the right to wear this uniform through months of rigorous training and in many cases active service in defense of our country. Marcus felt smaller with each word. The rubber chicken, which was still somehow in his hand, now seemed like the most inappropriate object in the world. I'm really sorry. I didn't understand. Inspector Williams continued his questions. Were you aware that touching a member of the Queen's Guard during a ceremony constitutes assault on a military officer? Marcus's eyes went wide. Assault? But I barely touched him. It was just a little poke. The law doesn't recognize degrees of unwanted physical contact when it comes to military personnel performing their duties, the inspector explained. The fact that you entered a restricted area makes it even more serious. For the next hour, Marcus was questioned about his background, his reasons for being in London, and his actions during the ceremony. Throughout the interrogation, he began to understand just how seriously the British took their military traditions and the protection of the royal family. The sergeant, whose name Marcus learned was Sergeant Davies, eventually sat down across from him. Mr. Thompson, I want you to understand something. The young man you touched today has served 2 tours in Afghanistan. He's seen friends die in combat. He's risked his life to protect civilians like yourself. When he stands guard at Buckingham Palace, he's performing a duty that connects him to centuries of military tradition and service. Marcus felt tears beginning to form in his eyes. I had no idea. I thought it was just pageantry. It is pageantry, Sergeant Davies acknowledged. but it's pageantry with purpose. It represents the dedication and sacrifice of every man and woman who has worn this uniform. When you turned it into a joke, you weren't just disrespecting one guard, you were disrespecting all of us and what we stand for. The weight of Marcus's actions was finally hitting him with full force. He thought about his grandfather, who had served in World War II and had always spoken about military service with deep respect. How would he feel if he saw Marcus treating soldiers like entertainment? "What's going to happen to me?" Marcus asked quietly. Inspector Williams looked up from his paperwork. "Normally, this would result in charges and possibly deportation. However, given that you're a first-time offender and appear to genuinely understand the seriousness of your mistake, we're prepared to offer you an alternative." Marcus looked up hopefully. "What kind of alternative?" "You will write a formal letter of apology to the guard you touched and to the entire Queen's Guard Regiment. You will also perform 20 hours of community service at a veterans' charity here in London. Finally, you will be banned from all royal properties for the remainder of your visit to the United Kingdom." Marcus nodded eagerly. "Yes, absolutely. I'll do whatever you want." "One more thing," Sergeant Davies added. "You will attend a 2-hour educational session about British military history and the role of the Queen's Guard. Perhaps if you understand what we do and why we do it, you'll think twice before treating military personnel like circus performers in the future." Over the next 3 days, Marcus completed his community service at a center that helped veterans transition back to civilian life. He met former soldiers who had lost limbs in combat, men and women who struggled with mental health issues from their service, and families who had lost loved ones in military conflicts. One veteran, a former Queen's Guard named Robert, who had lost his leg in an IED explosion in Afghanistan, spent time talking with Marcus about what military service really meant. "You see, Marcus," Robert explained as they organized donated clothing, "when you put on that uniform, you're not just representing yourself. You're representing every person who wore it before you and every person who will wear it after you. The discipline you saw during that ceremony isn't just for show. It's a reflection of the discipline that keeps soldiers alive in combat and helps them serve their country with honor." Marcus listened intently, finally beginning to understand the true meaning behind the traditions he had mocked. "I feel terrible about what I did. I wish I could take it back." "The good news is that you can learn from it," Robert replied. "Most people go through their whole lives without really understanding what military service means. You're getting a chance to understand it while you're still young enough to carry that knowledge forward." The educational session about British military history was equally eye-opening. Marcus learned about the Battle of Britain, the sacrifices made during both World Wars, and the ongoing role of the British military in peacekeeping operations around the world. He discovered that many of the guards he had tried to mock had served in some of the most dangerous places on Earth, putting their lives on the line to protect others. On his final day in London, Marcus returned to Buckingham Palace, not as a disruptive tourist, but as someone who had learned a hard lesson about respect. He watched the changing of the guard ceremony from the appropriate distance, seeing it now through completely different eyes. The precision and discipline that had once seemed robotic now appeared to him as expressions of dedication and pride. The silence and focus that had frustrated him before now struck him as profound evidence of these soldiers' commitment to their duty. When Marcus returned to the United States, he carried with him more than just souvenirs and photographs. He had gained a deep appreciation for military service and the sacrifices made by men and women in uniform. The rubber chicken, which had caused so much trouble, became a reminder of the importance of thinking before acting and treating others with respect. Marcus continued doing comedy, but his approach changed fundamentally. He learned to find humor in situations without making other people the unwilling targets of his jokes. He became an advocate for veterans' causes and often shared his story as a cautionary tale about the importance of respecting military personnel and traditions. Years later, when friends would ask him about his trip to London, Marcus would tell them about the day he learned that some things are too important to be treated as jokes. He would explain how a group of professional soldiers had taught him the difference between humor that brings people together and humor that tears them down. The Queen's Guard had indeed taught him respect the hard way, but in doing so, they had given him a gift that would last a lifetime. The understanding that true strength comes not from making others the subjects of ridicule, but from honoring the service and sacrifice of those who dedicate their lives to protecting others.